way from his room in Los Angeles. How you doing?
Hey, Christy. I'm good. I'm great.
Yeah, we worked together back in the day when I was over on the playtest team. But Jeevan, for people out there who might not be that familiar with you, what are some of the larger projects or champions you've worked on recently?
Yeah, so I mean, way back when I started, I used to work on live gameplay, so I did a lot of balance work, pro play adjustments, the same type of stuff you see in the patch notes nowadays. I put Rift Herald in the game there, and then I moved on to champion team. And so I designed Camille, Kaisa, and the Aatrox rework.
Right. So as a champion designer, what are a few of the things you do like on the day-to-day basis?
So depending on the part of the process we're in, it could be a little different. If we're right at the beginning of discovering a character, we have a lot of people sort of in a room trying to creatively brainstorm on what we could be. So for Aatrox, one of the starting points was, we wanted to really add some personality to this gigantic sword that he's wielding, that he actually, in some sense is in terms of identity. So we had this thought of making a greater personality attached with him and the weapon, and then that led us to Juggernaut, big, huge, heavy attacks, that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like we went from, it could be anything very general into something specific. And then after we figure out what the character is, then you just make spells every day. You script new stuff when you want to try something different. And, it takes a few weeks and months to put it all together, where you go from, we have a concept, which is big weapon swings, to an actual spell in game, which is, multicast Q spell.
Right, cool. So I know you also, it's not just the playtest team that's playing the champions internally. I know you played Aatrox a bunch too when you're trying to work out the kinks and figure out exactly what you want to do. Now that he's hit live, are you an Aatrox main now, or how does that work with those champions you create?
So I'm actually going to start working on getting my mastery up on him soon. At this point in time, we're playing at a company tournament, which you know about. So I'm trying to. I'm assigned marksman, so I'm trying to play my marksman game a little better. But I'm going to get to him soon. I'm excited. Of course, right now he's banned most games, so I probably couldn't try to play him anyway. But I'll get to it.
That's fair. Later down the road, once he doesn't get quite so many bans, maybe you can get a chance there. But I know you touched a little bit on the actual development of a champion, where early on you're thinking of what exactly is the identity of this guy, and then you work on actually making those abilities. Could you sort of run through the general timeline that it takes to create a champion? Like, what are you doing? 8 months out, 4 months out, 2 months, etc.
Right. Well, so we started this project in, I want to say, September. And so that was, 10 months ago? And so at that point in time, we had not much besides just talking about who the real core of Aatrox is. And, when we do a rework, we try to get sort of the soul of the character, the core fantasy of who they are, and see if we can bring that out further. And so it was more like, like I said, brainstorming, talking about it. And then within a few weeks after that, after we picked a direction where we want to go, we actually have a version in playtesting that we could start doing different things with. And, that lasts, I'd say, 3 or 4 months maybe before we really lock down on every ability. And then for the next few months, we're actually just making it come to life, right? Where I made a Q spell that was like a goofy looking version of his old animation, because that's all we had to work with at the time, I mean. And then we got much more people on it, animators, sound engineers, 3D artists, to make him look really amazing, sound amazing, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I know.
And then the last month or two, it's playtesting, right? It's making sure that we have a lot of people who are competent at the champion and competent at League of Legends playing with him, against him, and as him, and seeing how strong he is.
Yeah, and I know we've got actually a sneak peek of some of those abilities in just a moment. But very early on, I remember we tested out a bunch of crazy different abilities on this character. Were there any for you that you wish had made it into the game or got shut down in the process?
Yeah, so you might have been in this playtest, I'm not sure, but we have this spell called Carnage Zone, which is Aatrox would basically jump into the area and mark this huge area, and the idea was he's kind of inciting everyone in the battlefield to just lurch in, regardless of risk. And so when anyone died in that area, whether it's on his team or not, their death timer was reduced massively by up to 80% in one iteration. So we called it the Carnage Zone or the Clown Fiesta Zone. And what it did was, the fight would start and someone would die. And, before it actually had fully finished playing out, they'd be TPing back in already, and you'd see like the Vi that died at the start of the fight come back in and like mop it up. It was cool. It was like a lot of hyphy, crazy action and stuff like that. Had some major problems, but it was exciting for a few playtests. I mean, I liked watching everyone go into the bloodbath.
Yeah, I think on the playtest team we called it the Earth Circle because you had the lower cooldowns and all the attack speed and stuff, and it was a blast, but maybe a little bit too much fun with all the carnage everywhere. Moving on with that ultimate idea, I know there was another iteration that came a little bit closer to the one that actually ended up hitting live, where you could make that bargain with the devil, and it was sort of tied into the old Q on Aatrox. It was called Dark Flight, and you could actually have an ally that would become much stronger and end up reviving. You want to talk to me about a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was cool. That was the sort of like Blood Brothers type thing, where one teammate would accept Aatrox's sort of deal with the devil and become a Darken for a little while. And what this meant at the time, it was still a revive spell, but it was also a spell that burned you to death at the same time. Like the longer you were in the ultimate, the more damage you took, and you could stave off taking damage by dealing damage. So like as long as you were fighting, you were surviving. It was like live to die type of spell. And I think even in iteration we had them life linked or something. So when the two of them died, they both had revive, so they would just kind of fall to the ground at the same time. And it would be like a power play for the enemy team. They'd have this 5-on-3 and try to stall for the two guys coming back up. So it was pretty crazy, but it had the property of putting two revives in the game at the same time, and that was pretty hard to figure out how to make fair, so we had to pull away from that one.
Yeah, I can imagine. We actually just saw a clip of that on the screen from an actual playtest that I was playing in. And it's fun, too, because you get to see all those temporary visual effects with the Q that's just the dark circle on the ground and shows you how far something has come. But back in development, too, I know that you and some other designers like to have some fun with the actual ability names on the kit before they're actually necessarily locked on in. Were there any good ones you remember?
Yeah, so the little like bar that appears at the bottom of your screen when you cast a spell for Q, I think at one point that was something like Slam Jam. I don't remember.
I remember it was called Dodge Minigame at one point, which was a personal favorite of mine.
Yeah, Q was literally called Dodge Minigame. W at one point, I mean, so sometimes you have to make extremely temporary names to get people's attention. So W is called Gold All on My Chains.
Nice.
That was actually my favorite. Yeah, I had some dumber ones for my other characters too, but those are the best ones on Aatrox.
Yeah, I think there was also a generic Juggernaut auto attack reset, which was just like the most obvious ability name of all time I think I've seen.
Right. Yeah, that was a placeholder, yes.
Right, but as the champion starts to move along in production, you have to actually lock some abilities on the kit, meaning that you're not going to be making any major or fundamental changes to those abilities. What was the first ability that you were able to actually lock down with Aatrox?
Yeah, so that was definitely the Q. I mean, the first spell I even put in when I was trying to update Aatrox was that Q spell. Or it might have been the second, actually. I think I might have tried that the Carnage Zone first. But yeah, that was from the start, we kind of had this set of inspiration that we were drawing from, right? We looked at a lot of the cool versions of a huge dude with gigantic weapon with sort of really long telegraphed cleave spells that made people like basically flee the second you start winding them up, Dark Souls, Soul Calibur, stuff like that. And so we definitely not like locked down the Q first. And then when we actually saw it in game, we're like, wow, this guy basically spends all of his time casting Q. That's kind of the bread and butter of this character in every way. And so the kit was definitely sort of oriented around letting the Q play out, basically, at that point.
Yeah, the finished product definitely is very much about Aatrox's Q being the focal point. But as he was getting closer to actually releasing and hitting the live server, were there any concerns that you or the team had with him?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that's been very public lately, right? We had with any champion, we were trying to make sure that he was balanced well on release. And I think, everyone has their own sort of, I would do it this way, and trust me, I'm a balance expert. If you put these numbers here, it'd come out this way, but it's pretty hard. So I'm always sort of concerned about how that lands. Although, the fact that we micropatch things really quickly, I think helps nowadays. And then the other hard part was, he's a very different style of character than, old Aatrox was. Old Aatrox has been our most requested update for years, And so we knew that we had room to like have an audience with him if we did a really good execution. And the process, we knew we might be leaving some people behind, and that was a difficult decision, but I think one that was the right one to make.
Yeah, and I remember initially people had very different opinions, and then Rift Rivals happened after he saw a ton of play, like 100% pick and ban rate we're talking. How much of a say do you have in those balance changes, in the hot fixes that come in those, weeks and days after the initial release?
Yeah, I mean, the first few weeks of a character coming out, like I have a fairly large amount of involvement in what we're going to do, right? It's definitely a council, though. I'm not making almost any decisions on my own. I'm talking to, our core design leadership. I'm talking to a lot of people in live gameplay who are very good at modifying the game, tweaking it here and there to make sure it's balanced. I'm talking to our playtest team, who's got a lot of games on him. So it's a group effort. We're all sort of involved in it. And then as a character kind of settles, right, where it's past the point where it really needs to leverage my expertise consistently, he's just a character that live gameplay knows how he works, and they can figure him out pretty easily. Right. We have an Aatrox main on live gameplay right now, and he's very good at the character. So when he was like, yeah, this is probably going to make him really broken, we're pretty confident that he knows what he's talking about.
Fair enough. And speaking of Rift Rivals and just pro play in general, how confident or how sure were you that he actually was going to see some amount of play?
I wasn't sure. I mean, on the one hand, the Q spell is very telegraphed, and you could see why people thought it'd be hard to hit the spell, especially for really professional caliber players who are, dodging around in and out of it. On the other hand, and I think you're seeing this steadily, his R spell is exceptionally good with coordinated jungle play, right? That is some of the most powerful ways to threaten any squishy top laner, with the tower dive with his ultimate. And we knew that would be powerful. And then on top of that, when we were developing him before, it was before 8.11 where we were developing him. And so it had been a pretty stable meta for a long time in top lane of big tanky boys that had big shields or big health regen to survive top lane, right? Sion, Ornn, Maokai. And so we're like, well, this guy has got resourceless sustain and can reduce their healing and shielding, so he'll be good into that meta for sure. So we had an idea, he came out even stronger than I think anyone anticipated, but we had a thought.
So do you think he's doing too well now that we've seen him picked up by so many teams here across the world?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that his early game is pretty clearly very strong. His late game's a little weak, and I think those are just kind of too pronounced on both ends for it to be fair right now. So we have some changes in 8.14 to kind of even that a little bit, pulling down his early game a bit, putting it back into late game, and we'll see what happens from there. But it is exciting to see him get picked, and I think I saw a lot of really cool performances by some of the people at Rift Rivals, and they were really showing off their mastery of the champion very early, and that was awesome to see.
Yeah, and I'm sure, barring any bans that come Aatrox's way, that we will be seeing him here in the EU LCS coming up very, very soon. But I know after Aatrox, there are other projects that you're going to be working on at Riot. Have you started on another champion or rework already?
I started on a new project yesterday. Yeah.
Wow. Any hints you can give the fans?
Will definitely be broken.
Excellent.
No, I can't say much yet. Just that I think the ideas we have are exciting. I think there's a good chance that a lot of our esports fans might find it interesting what we do with it. But we're so early that it might not stick any of that. But it's just exciting to see the new stuff that we're going to be making.
All right. Well, that's awesome to hear from you again, guys. This has been Jeevan Sidhu, the lead designer.